That's a good cup of Joe. A good cup of Joe on a good day. Friday, we made it to Friday, guys. We made it all the way through the short week. Sometimes these short weeks are much longer than a normal week. Pack 5 or 6 days activities into a 4-day week when we get these holidays. But I wouldn't trade him, of course. Wouldn't trade him. Mike Bravo joined us early this morning. He's got a meeting, so he's jumping off. Richard's online already. So good morning to those folks that are out there already. Good morning, folks. I had folks joining as we keep going. Get the morning started. Having our fresh cup of coffee in a Montana cup this morning. Montana, big sky country, of course. Today, we're going to finish up what we started yesterday. Yesterday, we started on AC2, the control AC2, which is account management. So we're going to keep going on. Yesterday, we covered the base control. And today we're going to cover the 12 technically, enhancements that we can take that control and expand it. And when we talk about these enhancements, not all of them will apply to your organization. You'll pick and choose based on risk requirements and requirements that are set out by the organizational leadership. You're not going to do all of them. You might not do any of them. It's all based on that risk-based response to security. So, the thing we have to think about, some of these enhancements require advanced automation within your organization. Some of them can be done just with manual processing. So it's important to follow this stuff. It's important to look at it, to know what the controls are. So as always, we're going to look at the control description. We'll look at the controls. We'll look at the organizationally defined variables and how some of those may look. I'm going to pick some wild random ones. It doesn't necessarily mean your organization has to follow these, and in some cases I would hope you don't. Those responses, those variables need to be defined based on your organization, how you approach risk and your risk appetite, right? And the automation you have, right? And then finally we'll look at how we would go about assessing these enhancements. And the reason we look at the assessment is because if we know what the test looks like, if we know what the assessment is going to look like, we can ensure we implement these enhancements correctly. And I said it yesterday, but I'll reinforce it today. You can't have a control enhancement without the base control. So you can't have AC2 Enhancement 3 without implementing AC2. So that's kind of a given. So let's jump into the slide deck and see what this is all about. So again, here we go. We're looking at 853 Revision 5. That's the newest revision, of course. We're looking at AC2 account management, but we're looking at the control enhancements now. So as we jump into these, let's get the mouse on the right place. As we jump into these, we'll jump into the first one. AC2 Enhancement 1. The way these are written on these slides in the header is the way it will appear in NIST Special Publication 853 Revision 5. You'll see the control and then that pipe character, that straight up and down line, and then what the enhancement is. So when we start talking about these, I'll just call out the enhancement name. Automated System Account Management is this one. Enhancement 1, Automated System Account Management includes using automated mechanism to create, enable, modify, disable, remove accounts, notify account managers when accounts are created, enable, modified, disabled, or removed, or when users are terminated or transferred. Monitor system account usage and report atypical system account usage. Automatic mechanisms can include internal system functions and emails, telephonic, and text messaging notifications. So there are no related controls on this one. So we're using automated mechanism. It could be something like, and I hate to say it, but something like SolarWinds could allow us to do this. There's some enablements we can use in Active Directory, but things within the system, there may be the ability to send the mail from a mail message from the system itself, like a Linux system can send a message saying an account was created, an account was disabled. And that's what we're talking about here. There's an automated mechanism around the accounts, and we have to think about how we are going to embrace or use automation within our organization. Things are moving so fast now that we have to have automation. We have to have automation to keep up with things, right? So we look at, here's the control. At the top of the slide, we've got the control in its raw form, right? That's with the organizationally defined variable as it's originally written. So support the management of system accounts using what? And the assignment is organizationally defined automated mechanisms. In my fake system, I said the management of system accounts, support the management of system accounts using the organization's approved automated accounts manager, right? So we can have automated accounts manager that takes care of mailing managers when accounts are created, disabled, whatever. We can help, we can use these systems to create an account. We can put in the user and the type of user, and it will create the account for us. So we can use some of these. So this is not the variable your organization necessarily will have, but you have to think about how we will use automated account management in our organization if we're required to have this control, right? When we go to assess the control, this is what the assessor will look at. This is from NIST Special Publication 853 Alpha, but this is revision 4. So as we go through the slide deck, there's going to be a few things that are not quite aligned, and we'll see those, right? So this one, the assessment objective is determine if the organization employs automated mechanisms to support the management of information system accounts. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward. We have the ability to examine, interview, and test. Again, those are the 3 methods we can use. And then we have a bunch of objectives we can select from. I'm not going to go into the objectives on each, or excuse me, the objects on each of these assessment criteria because we got a lot of controls. We got a lot of enhancements to cover. But we're going to say that if your organization documents that you use an automated account management system, it's up to the assessor to look at that documentation, see how it's implemented, talk to people about it, and then test the system to make sure it's working. So if you have one, that's cool to document it. But if you don't have an automated system, don't write down you've got one, because you can get yourself in trouble when the assessor comes around, right? Going on to Enhancement 2, automated temporary and emergency account management. Again, this expands on the control. The management of temporary and emergency accounts includes the removal or disabling of such accounts automatically after a predefined period of time rather than at the convenience of the system administrator. Automatic removal or disabling of account provides a more consistent implementation. Again, no related controls. And this is just making sure that if we create an emergency account or if we create a temporary account, it's got a clock on it. And we don't have to ensure that the system administrator goes in after a week and disables it, or goes in after a day and disables it. So we have to do a couple things here. We have to define as an organization what those time frames are, and then we have to determine how we're going to do it. Systems like Active Directory, we can go in there and we can set a disablement time period when we create the account. So that is built into a lot of systems. So here's what the control itself looks like. Automatically, and then we have our organizationally defined variable, and this time the first one is a selection. We're either going to remove or disable temporary and emergency accounts after, then there's an assignment, the organizationally defined period of time for each account type. In my fictitious system, I said we will automatically remove temporary and emergency accounts after, and then there's 2 time frames. For a temporary account, we're saying after 5 days, and for an emergency account, after 24 hours. Again, this is up to your organization to determine these time frames and how you want to handle these things, right? So if you have this enhancement, if you have AC2 Enhancement 2 as a requirement, you're going to have to determine how you're going to do this. A lot of the current systems, a lot of the automated, or a lot of the account management systems, things like Active Directory, can automatically do this. It's built into the system, right? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to assess this thing. Again, we have examine, interview, and test. Means we can look at documents, we can talk to people, and we can test the technical merits of this control. And we determine if 2 things as an assessor. The organization defines the time period after which the information system automatically removes or disables temporary and emergency accounts, and the information system automatically removes or disables temporary accounts after the organizationally defined time period for each type of account. So the first part is we define it, and the second part is we do it. So the assessor is going to go look at relevant documentation. Can you prove when you created an account? When you created that account, did it 5 days later, did it automatically go away? Let me look at the settings when you create an account. Let me look at your standard operating procedure for creating an emergency account or a temporary account. It should have in there how you set up that automatic disablement after the specified period of time. Again, those variables are going to be dependent on your organization, so it's up to you. Coffee, good morning. I see you joined us. So, Enhancement 3, disable accounts. So, disabling expired, inactive, or otherwise anomalous accounts supports the concept of least privilege and least functionality, which reduce the attack surface of a system. So again, we see this all the time. If you've got an account that's not being used, there should be some timer on it. If you don't use it within a specified period of time, it should be disabled, or it should be maybe even deleted or removed. So it's going to be dependent on your organization how you handle this, right? So here's what the control says. Disable accounts within, and there's an organizationally defined time period, when the accounts have done one of these things. When they've expired, when they're no longer associated with a user or individual, when they're in a violation of the organizational policy, or they've been inactive for a specified period of time. Again, organizationally defined variable, what's that time period? You have to make that as a risk-based decision, right? So my fictitious system, I said, disable accounts within 5 days when the accounts. So we're giving the system administrator 5 days after one of these activities has happened. They've expired. They're no longer associated with an individual. That person may be left. They're a violation of organizational policy. Maybe it was a group account, and now we're saying group accounts are not authorized anymore. Or they've been inactive for 30 days. Again, with systems like Active Directory and Linux, we can look and see when an account is 31 days inactive. We can run a script on that. We can look for those accounts. There's management tools we can use for that. So how we do it is up to us. We're defining in the control what's the requirement. So when the assessor comes into town, they're going to say, first of all, we're going to determine if the organization defines a time period after which the information system automatically disables inactive accounts. And if we look at this, if we look back at the control, it doesn't state in revision 5 that that has to be automatically happening, right? There's no requirement for it to automatically happen. So I think what we got here is a little bit of a misalignment with revision 4 of the alpha and revision 5 of the control manual. That's okay, we can work with it. The assessor can still work with this. You can say, okay, there's no requirement for it to be automatic, but I want to say you can still show me where's that time period. And the second part of this is if the information system automatically disables inactive accounts after the organizationally defined time period. That may not be automatic in this case because there's no requirement for it to be automatic. I'm going to say automatic is going to be better. In every case it's going to be better. It's going to allow you to be more efficient and effective when you do this. Again, this gives us methods, examine, interview, and test. I'm going to look at your documentation. If the documentation says, hey, we automatically disable these things after 30 days, and it's done within 5 days, okay, let me see that. Let me see when somebody was terminated. Let me see when their account was done. Let me see your standard operating procedure. Let me talk to the system admins. Let me test the system. Let me put a user in there. Maybe my test is going to be over the next 2 weeks. I'll put a user in today, and I'll come back in 6 days and see if that was automatically removed based on its account type, right? So cool. On to Enhancement 4, Automated Audit Actions. Account management audit records are defined in accordance with AU2, which we haven't got to the audit control family yet, and reviewed, analyzed, and reported in accordance with AU6. Of course, we haven't got to that one as well. So we see our related controls are AU2 and AU6. So we'll put a thumbtack in this one because when we get to AU2 and 6, we're going to have to make sure we're in compliance with that. In your daily life, of course, you're just going to flip to AU2 and AU6 and make sure you're in compliance with that as specified by your organization, because there's going to be requirements as far as what gets audited, when it gets audited, where it goes, that kind of stuff. But in our case, we can jump right ahead to the control, right? Automatically audit account creation, modification, enabling, disabling, and removal actions. That is when we talk about audit here, we mean something similar to logging. Are we sending those actions? When that action happens on the system, is it being sent to a central log server like Splunk or syslog server or something like that? Is someone looking at it? That's the other part of it. We can't just send it there. Is there an automated mechanism? Is there a SIEM tool? Is there somebody manually looking at this? And that's what's going to happen when the assessor comes around. Determine if the information system automatically audits the following actions. We have them listed there. And then determine if the organization assigns personnel or roles to be notified when these things happen. Are those audit events going to someone? Is someone being notified? And then determine if the information system notifies organizationally defined personnel or roles of the following actions. Is somebody being notified? Is that a text? Is it an email? Is it a pager? I don't know. It's up to your organization to determine that. And again, the assessor has the ability to examine, interview, and test these things. That's up to the assessor, and it's like tailoring the control set. The assessor can tailor the assessment. They can determine if they're going to examine and test, examine, interview, and test. Just examine. So they're going to look at documentation. They're going to say, hey, you're saying that the audit system works like this. It sends notifications to Splunk. Let me see those. Let me create an account, and now let me see it where it shows up in Splunk. Show me your standard operating procedures. Let me talk to the Splunk admin. Let me talk to the system admin creating these accounts. I want to know that this is actually happening. That's the kind of things they're going to look for. When you create this control, when you implement this control, you should be doing the same things. Make sure that it's going where it's supposed to go. Make sure the people that are getting notified that are supposed to be getting notified, because the assessor can check all that. 5, Enhancement 5, Inactivity Logout. Discussion on this one. Inactivity Logout is behavior or policy based and requires users to take physical action to log out when they're expecting inactivity longer than a defined period. Automatic enforcement of inactivity logout is addressed by AC-11. So when you're when you're idle on your computer for 15 minutes and it automatically locks, that's AC-11. That's not this one. This is a requirement. Say when you get up from your desk, you walk away, you lock your machine. So let's look at the control. Require that users log out when, and again, there's an assignment here. It's up to the organization when we're requiring those users to log out. It's an organizationally defined time period of expected inactivity or a description of when to log out, right? So in our fictitious organization, we're saying require that users log out when their computer is unattended. Cut and dry. If it's unattended, you walk away, you leave for the day, you go to lunch, whatever. If it's unattended, you lock your computers. You log out, right? Not lock. I should take that back. It's not lock. It's log out, right? So that's a little bit different, right? So think about that. Log out at the end of the day. Maybe log out at lunch. Maybe you want them to log out when they walk away. It's up to the organization to define this based on the risk-based decision. And the assessor is going to come around. In this case, we only have interview and examine. We don't have a test. There's no technical component to this, right? Because we're saying the user has to do it. There's no technical implementation. It's the user doing it. So we're saying the first part is determine if the organization defines either the time period of expected inactivity that requires users to log out or the description of when users are required to log out, and also requires that users log out when the organizationally defined time period of inactivity is reached, or in accordance with the organizationally defined description of when to log out. And I know it seems like we're repeating things. It's repetitive there, but that first part is always what we're doing. We're defining it. We're documenting it. We're writing it down somewhere. We're making it part of policy. We're making it part of a standard, making it part of a procedure. And the second part is we're doing it. We're making sure that people do it. So this one we're going to examine. We're going to examine the documentation. We're going to look at the policies and the standard procedures. And then we'll interview people. We'll talk to people. We may even just watch people to see if they do what they're supposed to be doing, right? On to 6. This is a huge one. It's our biggest control as far as the discussion. Dynamic privilege management is a bear of a thing to do. It's going to be in more No, no, we can do some of this in regular, normal organizations with things like Active Directory, but we really want more advanced tools, right? In contrast to access control approaches that employ static accounts and predefined user privileges, dynamic access control approaches rely on runtime access control decisions facilitated by dynamic privilege management, such as attribute-based access control. While user identities remain relatively consistent over time, user privileges typically change more frequently based on ongoing mission or business requirements and the operational needs of the organization. For example, dynamic privilege management is the immediate revocation of privileges from users as opposed to requiring that users terminate and restart their sessions to reflect changes in privileges. And we've seen that before. If you get updated privileges or change privileges, the admin may say, okay, log out and log back on the system so that the privileges stick. That's not the case here. You don't have to log out and log back on. The system will automatically change your privileges dynamically, and at that point, at the point when they're changed, that automatically reduces or increases your privileges. It's important because in those cases where you have to log out and log back in, if someone reduces a person's privileges, they may retain that elevated status until they recycle the system, until they log out and log back in, which means they could potentially stay logged in for a long time with privileges they shouldn't have, right? Dynamic privilege management can also include mechanisms that change user privileges based on dynamic rules as opposed to editing specific user profiles. Examples include automatic adjustments of privileges if they are operating out of their normal work times, if their job function or assignment changes, or if systems are under duress in emergency situations. Dynamic privilege management includes the effects of privilege changes, for example, where the changes to encryption keys used for encryption or communications. So here's another thing here is maybe you have administrative rights during the day, but after work hours you have normal rights. You can't do elevated actions anymore outside your normal work period. That's dynamic management. Or maybe you have to go into a specific location, be on a specific machine to get those accesses. We see this with Bastogne hosts. Bastogne hosts, sometimes you have to log in to a specific jump station to be able to do privileged account access stuff. So we see this is related to AC-16. We see it in the control set. It really looks a lot smaller. So implement, and then we got an organizationally defined variable, and that's the organizationally defined dynamic privilege management capabilities. So in our fictitious system, we're saying implement time and location-based dynamic privilege management capabilities for administrative actions. So we're just saying, hey, make sure administrative actions are done from specific places at specific times. And outside of those times or those locations, those administrative actions can't be done, right? And again, these variables I'm using are a little bit loose. They should tighten them up a little bit in your organization, and these may not reflect exactly what your organization would have, right? So when the assessor comes around, this is what they're going to look at in the alpha. Determine if the organization defines a list of dynamic privilege management capabilities to be implemented in the information system. Do we document it? And then part 2, if the information system implements the organizationally defined list of dynamic privilege management capabilities. Now it's making sure it's working, testing the technical capabilities, interviewing the people to see if it's actually being done, right? In this one, we have the assessment methods of examine, interview, and test again. So we have the ability to use all 3 of the methods. So it gives us the ability. Kevin Grant has joined us. Good morning. Morning, Kevin. All right, on to 7, privileged user accounts. This is enhancement 7. Privileged roles are organizationally defined roles assigned to individuals to allow those individuals to perform certain security relevant functions that ordinary users are not authorized to perform. Privileges include key management, account management, database administration, system and network administration, web administration, a role-based scheme, a role-based access scheme organizes permitted system access to privileges into roles. In contrast, an attribute-based access scheme specified allowed system accesses and privilege based on attributes. All right, this is again another updated control. When we get to the assessment of this, we're going to see it's just role-based. So we have role-based or attribute-based now. So we can give people attributes, and that can give them permissions based on attributes they have, not just the roles. And then no related controls. In this one is what it looks like as the control stated. Establish and administer privileged user accounts in accordance with, and then we have a selection here. It's either role-based access scheme or an attribute-based access scheme. And then we're going to monitor privileged roles or attributes. We're going to monitor changes to roles or attributes. And then we're going to revoke access when privileged role or attribute assignments are no longer appropriate. Straightforward. In R1, all we did was we selected for our fictitious system a role-based access scheme. In the wild, we have 3 methods to use to assess this control: examine, interview, and test. Right? We're going to determine if the organization establishes and administers privileged user accounts in accordance with role-based access scheme that organizes allowed information system access and privileges into roles, monitors privileged role assignments, and defines actions to be taken when privileged role assignments are no longer appropriate, and takes organizational defined actions when privileged role assignments are no longer appropriate. And if we look back here at our control, we had either role-based or access-based as options. And when we go to the assessment, it's just talking about role-based. Again, this is because the alpha, the 853 alpha, is aligned with revision 4, not revision 5. So this needs to be updated. So the assessor will have to do some modification to this to say, okay, we're not just talking about role-based here, but we could be talking about attribute-based. And we're going to do the same assessment steps here to make sure that we're compliant with that. Are we defining the actions to be taken when privileged role assignments or attribute-based assignments are no longer appropriate? Are we managing and monitoring all of that? So we need to go back and forth and make sure we're covering all of these. Are we monitoring the changes to roles or attributes? Okay. Do we have an assessment for monitoring that? We've got kind of in 27C2, organization defined actions when privileged role assignments are no longer appropriate. But I would say we, as an assessor, you really want to see how are they monitoring changes to the attributes. And I think the second part would take care of when they're no longer. That's revocation, right? So on to 8. This is dynamic account management. Approaches for dynamically creating, activating, managing, and deactivating system accounts rely on automatically provisioning the accounts at runtime for entities that were previously unknown. Organizations plan for the dynamic management, creation, activation, and deactivation of system accounts by establishing trust relationships, business rules, and mechanisms with appropriate authorities to validate related authorizations and privileges. So this is going to be one of those things that you're going to have in more advanced organizations. This AC-16, we look at it. I guess I don't have the generic version, but I've already filled in the variable here. You can see there's a variable here. Create, activate, manage, and deactivate. And there's an organizationally variable there. We have to define what types of accounts we're going to handle through this dynamic account management. And in this case, we're saying partner and guest accounts dynamically. These generally, in my opinion, will be generally less privileged accounts, and we can do those dynamically. That means that somebody comes in and they need a guest account. We can dynamically create it kind of when they ask for it. So think about how you want to do this. Again, a risk-based decision. When the assessor comes around, they're going to say, hey, determine if the organization defines information system accounts to be created by the information system dynamically. Okay, do we define that? So always we're documenting this stuff. We have to have an audit trail. We want to document this stuff. The information system creates organizationally defined information system accounts dynamically. So we're documenting, we're saying it happens, and now let's see the system do it. So as an assessor, I want to see it happen. I want to see how you do this, right? I'm going to take a little break here. Let's look at what's going on. Kevin Grant is saying, good morning. We talked about that a little bit. Mike Bravo's got a comment. That's control, enhancement. And this control, its enhancement and its AP look cumbersome, but they can be met with Active Directory or LDAP UI. Yeah, a lot of the stuff we talk about, there's some cumbersome parts. There's some parts that, especially as Active Directory becomes more and more advanced, and Mike, you probably have some more experience with that than I do. It's kind of built in. Some of the stuff's built into the systems. Old love with Mike. Mike is here, and Michael is here this morning as well. Good morning, Michael. More, and we got folks join in as we like to see. So, use automation. There's a lot of automation built into to PAM for Linux or into Active Directory for Windows systems that we can use. So we need to have skilled administrators that know what they're doing. Then can we give them a requirement? And that's what we're saying with these controls. We're not telling the system administrator how to implement the control. We're just telling the system administrator, you need to do this, right? You need to do this with the account management system we've got. I need you to be able to go find accounts that are 90 days old and disable them automatically. I don't want the administrator to look at everybody's account and see when the last login was. I want them to have a script that runs and automatically disables those accounts and provides a report as well. So let's use automation. Mike said that's a great point. Bishop's here. Good morning, Bishop. We go on to 9 restrictions on use of shared and group accounts. Before permitting the use of shared or group accounts, organizations consider the increased risk due to lack of accountability with such accounts. Yeah, shared and group accounts, in my mind, I would just get rid of them unless there's an organizational need where you have to have them and there's no other way to do things. The problem is, a lot of times with a group or a shared account, I could log in, do something nefarious, and then when we go to audit it, it's me or 1 of 5 other people, right? We can't pin it to a specific person. There are some ways around this, right? So maybe we can only switch a user into those shared accounts. Maybe I have to log in with my account and then become that account, so it gives me an audit trail of me becoming that account. But I say there's a lot of cumbersomeness around here. There's a lot of problems. Let's create those roles. Let's create permissions for a role and then move people into that role, right? Create a group and move people into that group to give them the permissions. Try to avoid these things if you can. That's my personal opinion. There's obviously operational reasons we have to have these sometimes. So here's how the control looks in the book. Only permit the use of shared and group accounts that meet, and then there's a variable, organizationally defined conditions for establishing shared and group accounts. And in my fictitious account, I said, only permit the use of shared and group accounts that meet temporary operational needs as approved by the risk management team. Personally, I would just say, no, we're not going to do it. But as we're going through the controls, we want to walk through them and look at them, right? The assessor, here's what the assessor's going to look at. They've got the 3 methods again. They've got examine, interview, and test, all 3 methods. What they're going to do is determine if the organization defines conditions for establishing shared group accounts. That's that policy, that's documentation, that's procedure. Let me look at the paperwork. And then part 2 only permits the use of shared or groups accounts that meets organizationally defined conditions for establishing shared group accounts. As the assessor, I'm going to say, let me see your list of group accounts. Let me see how these came about. Let me see the audit trail when you created them. Maybe I'll walk through the process of creating a group account. How does it work? Let me try to create one. Let me make sure all the approval checks happen. So we see we have the ability to check the automated mechanisms for implementing the management of shared group accounts. How's that happening? And remember, there's going to be some other things we have to think about when we talk about these shared accounts. We talked about it in the base control when we talked about AC2. If a person leaves from this group, we have to have a little extra management. We've got to go in and change those passwords, change those passphrases, change the ability to get into these accounts, however that method is, right? 10 is nice. Enhancement 10, shared and group account credential change. Like I said, this is withdrawn. It's been implemented in the base control, AC2, Part K, where we said if you have this, if you have group or shared accounts, you've got to be able to manage them. So that's in the base control. It's gone out of here. So that's one less. That way we've gone from 13 enhancements to 12. And that takes us on to 11, right? Which I walk right down. Usage conditions. Specify and enforce usage conditions that help enforce the principle of least privilege. Increase user accountability and enable effective account monitoring. Account monitoring includes alerts generated if the account is used in violation of organizational parameters. Organizations can describe specific conditions or circumstances for which system accounts can be used, such as by restricting certain days of the week, times, or specific durations of time. No related controls. So if we go look at this control in the wild, and apparently I did it again, I automatically removed the variable, but I'm saying the variable I put in for the first part is enforce time and location restrictions for domain administrative accounts, right? And that gives us the ability to write it into policy. The policy says, hey, domain accounts can only be used from these jump stations. They can only be used during business hours, which includes, the days of the weeks that the business is in operation. That puts restrictions so we don't have people coming in outside of business hours using those domain administrative accounts. So the assessor is going to look at it. It's going to say, hey, determine if the organization defines circumstances and usage conditions to be enforced for information system accounts, right? There's our documentation. The organization defines information system accounts for which the organization defines circumstances and usage conditions are to be enforced. So we talk about what can happen, what the circumstances are, and then we say what accounts are they. Those first two are just your documentation step, writing it in policies, procedures, and standards. And then the third part, the information system enforces the organizationally defined circumstances and usage conditions for organizationally defined information system accounts. That's the actual implementation. It's happening. We'll interview people. We'll look at audit trails. We'll test the mechanisms to make sure they're working correctly. Again, that shows you the assessor in this case has all three test methods: examine, interview, and test. Almost there, guys. I know I'm running a little bit long today. Enhancement 12. Atypical usage includes accessing systems at certain times of the day from locations that are not consistent with the normal usage patterns of individuals. Monitoring for atypical usage may reveal rogue behavior by individuals or an attack in progress. Account monitoring may inadvertently create privacy risks since data collected to identify atypical usage may reveal previously unknown information about the behavior of individuals. Organizations assess and document the privacy risk from monitoring accounts for atypical usage in their privacy impact statement assessments and make determinations that are in alignment with their privacy program plan. Related controls: AU6, 7, CA7, IR8, and SI4. Now, a couple things in this discussion, right? First, we have to determine what's normal, right? What are normal patterns, right? So it's easy if we're very restrictive. Some government organizations say, hey, you can only work in this specific location, and this specific location is only open from like 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Anything outside of that is atypical. But atypical could also include large data transfers. Atypical could be using tools that normally aren't used in the environment. Atypical could be accessing sites that you normally don't access. So when we build this profile of people, there are privacy concerns. And that's all they're saying in the second half, is work with the privacy office. And we said this before, privacy and security have to work together now. So work with the privacy office. Make sure that what we're collecting is not a privacy concern. So here's what it looks like. Monitor system accounts for, there's an organizationally defined variable, and that's a organizationally defined atypical usage, and report atypical usage of system accounts to who, and it's again, it's assignment, the organizationally defined personnel or roles. So I said, monitor system accounts for excessive data transfer or excessive logon attempts, and report atypical usage of system accounts to the Security Operations Center. If we see that, and that should be an automated notification. We don't want to have to manually do this, but we want to have the ability to do it manually as well. So the assessor comes to town. They've got all three methods they can use: examine, interview, and test, right? So the first part, determine if the organization defines atypical usage to be monitored for the information system. We said that in our case. We said, excessive data transfer or a lot of logons. So we defined that. And then we determine, does the organization monitor the information system accounts for organizationally defined atypical usage? Are we actually doing it? And then determine if the organization defines the personnel or roles whom atypical usage of the information system accounts are to be reported. And we did that in our case. We said the Security Operations Center. And then the second part is reports the atypical usage of information system accounts to those organizational defined personnel or roles. Is it actually happening? Are we actually reporting that? If it's automated, we should be able to do that. As an assessor, I can go in and say, okay, well, if you're saying excessive logon attempts, and you say normal logon is maybe 10, I'm going to try 15. I'll try 15 logon attempts if I can, and then I'll see, does the Security Operations Center get notified? Or maybe you say anything over 500 megabytes of file transfer is excessive, and I try to transfer a gigabyte file. Does the Operations Center get notified? What do they do with it? Do they know what to do? Is it in their procedures and policy? Let's talk to the security operations people. Let's talk to the people that are responsible for defining these rules and see if they really understand it. And I know we're running along, we're getting close to the end because this is 13, this is our last enhancement. Disable accounts for high-risk individuals. Discussion around this one: users who pose a significant security and or privacy risk include individuals from whom reliable evidence indicates either the intention to use unauthorized access to system to cause harm or through whom adversaries will cause harms. Such harm includes adverse impacts to organizational operations, organizational assets, individuals, the organization, or the nation. Close coordination among system administrators, legal staff, human resource managers, and authorizing officials is essential when disabling accounts of high-risk individuals. Now, again, we can define this within our organization. What is a high-risk individual? Maybe it's somebody that's getting ready to leave. Maybe they put in their 2-week notice. Maybe it's someone we've noticed a lot of atypical behavior, and we really want to make sure they're not doing something that's fishy or unauthorized or dangerous, right? Or we think somebody's been compromised. So we're going to start monitoring or disabling accounts for those high-risk individuals, right? So here's what the control looks like in the wild. Disable accounts of individuals within, and there's an assignment, organizationally defined time period of the discovery of what? Something the organizationally defines as a significant risk. In my fictitious system, I said, disable accounts of individuals within 30 minutes of the discovery of the installation of malicious attacker tool. Not this, but the installation of malicious attacker tools. So when we discover someone is installing malicious attacker tools, within 30 minutes, and it probably should be faster than that, that account should be disabled. And maybe there's a reason we want 30 minutes. Maybe that's to do some forensics or something. I don't know. Remember, these are just fictitious variables I'm putting in here for examples only. You need to determine this with the risk people, the security people, the privacy people. All need to get together and say, this is what these variables should be. When the assessor rolls down, guess what they're going to do? They have the ability to examine, interview, and test, all three of the methods. They're going to determine if the organization defines the time period in which the accounts are to be disabled upon discovery of the significant risk posed by the users of such accounts, and also that we actually disable those user accounts that are posing significant risk. So, as an assessor, I can do that. I can review your documentation, review your procedures. Let me talk to the people that are responsible for disabling the account, and let's test it. Let's create an account. And as an assessor, you should have accounts created for you. Let's take one of those and say that they're high risk. Now let's go through the process, right? And that, I know it was a long run. Almost 45 minutes this morning, guys. I know it's a long run. But between AC2, when we talked about the base control itself and the enhancements, we made it through. I knew it wasn't going to be one session. I knew this was a big control. We got another couple big controls coming up in the access control family. This is one of them. It's one of the big ones. One of those I like to use for examples because it's got a lot of meat to it. It's got a lot of enhancements, right? The control itself is big. So if you didn't look at that one, I'll throw up there the link to the AC2, the actual control itself. Kind New, I think, Mr. Rich 504. I don't know if I've seen Mr. Rich before. Good morning, cybersecurity analyst. Beyond helpful. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Mr. Rich, this is a community, and it's folks like you that throw the comments up that help everyone. And obviously everybody else commented. You'll always see me referring to Mike Bravo. Mike has a lot of information he can share with us. It's always good to see him. It's always good to see anyone. It's the community we're building of security and risk minded people. We work in this cyber world every day, and we want to make sure we're helping each other get the place we need to go. A lot of times these controls get dumped on our steps, and we don't know what to do with them. So we'll all talk about it. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Well done for a big control. There's one that's a little bigger coming next week or the week after. I appreciate that, Mike. I did reach out. If you didn't join the Facebook group, we're going to start a mastermind, cyber risk and security mastermind group. It's only going to be 8 to 10 people, and we're going to meet. Right now, we're talking about meeting monthly to just one-on-one. We're probably have to meet on Zoom because we're still distributed. But yeah, go out to the Facebook post. It's Facebook, and the Facebook page is Cyber-Recon Training, all one word. And I'll throw the link in the show notes below. Mr. Rich saying, greatly appreciated. Bogby, thank you all for the comments. As you can, if you haven't yet, if you're watching this, please like and comment on the video. And if you can, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to be notified. Going live daily now until we get through all of 853, revision 5. There's a lot of controls to go. We're hitting, every weekday we're going to hit one of them and drive through it till we get done. So if you want to be notified when we're going live, when they're scheduled, what's scheduled, subscribe and hit the bell. It does help us. Like the video, like the channel, that helps. But otherwise, I guess we hit the end of the day, end of the week. Have a good weekend. Be safe. Take care of your friends, your family, your coworkers. As Mike and Sierra Bravo will say, go get some. Go take care of each other. And see you Monday morning, bright and early, looking at AC3 at 8 o'clock. You guys be good. It's always nice talking to you.